Hello everyone, welcome back to a new video. Today we will be discussing the new VP selection for Kamala Harris and why it completely sucks. So yeah, let's just get into it. So it is official, Tim Walz is Kamala's VP pick, and wow, you cannot make this crap up. You somehow picked the worst option out of pretty much all of them. Maybe Pete Buttigieg was a worse option, but that's wasn't even really in the question. Nobody thought she was going to pick him. But Tim Walz, people thought she was going to pick Josh Shapiro or maybe even Mark Kelly or Gretchen Whitmer. Tim Walz is a radical who is basically Bernie Sanders, but from Minnesota. He's the governor of a swing state that's not even really a swing state. It's a lean Democrat state, so not really going to help you in any of the swing states. He's not very well liked there. He's not very popular in his own state. He doesn't really have much appeal in the actual Midwest with blue collar voters because he's not blue collar whatsoever. And also completely kills the idea that Kamala was trying to build around herself, saying that, oh, she's not radical, she's actually moderate. You can't do that anymore because you are so scared of losing your radical Hamas base that you deny it the best option because he was Jewish and then picked one of the worst options by picking essentially Bernie Sanders with a Fargo accent. And I used to live in Minnesota. It is not a great place there. You cannot point to that state and say, oh, wow, this is such a great place. I need to know who's the governor here because they're clearly a great candidate. No, he isn't. He is quite possibly the worst pick that you could possibly have thought of outside of Pete Buttigieg or, hell, Bernie Sanders. But even Bernie Sanders has a more unique feel and he can appeal to a lot more voters than Tim Walz, which only alienates moderates. And Tim Walz, not exactly a great candidate. He is a radical and completely kills pretty much all moderation because this is the guy who just a week ago was talking about how great socialism was.
But we can get out there, reach out, make the case. And for one thing, don't ever shy away from our progressive values. One person's socialism is another person's neighborliness.
Should Minnesota be a sanctuary state?
If the definition of that is that the federal government enforces immigration law and local law enforcement enforces local law, then yes.
Should cities be allowed to be sanctuary cities?
Yes, local control.
And even then, it would have been better if she picked a more seemingly moderate candidate. I mean, Josh Shapiro wasn't exactly moderate, but people thought he was, and he was relatively well liked in his state. Tim Walz is not seen as a moderate at all. He's seen as a far left radical, which is why people in Minneapolis like him. And he's not very well liked in his state, and especially in the rural areas, because Minnesota, there's a weird thing with the counties where, for some reason, the rural counties are, all kind of swingy, and they're more so lean Republican rather than the norm throughout all the rest of the states, which is that the rural areas are heavily Republican and the cities are the deep blue districts that have all the Democrats in there. Minnesota doesn't really work like that. It's not necessarily out of the blue if a ton of the rural counties vote for the Democrats, and really that only changed in 2020 when Trump basically turned the state around and started maximizing support in the rural counties, which that has always been a problem for Republicans winning the state, is maxing out support in those rural counties and not letting them be lean Republican and them being safe Republican. Because really, picking Tim Walz, that's what you're going to do. You're going to accelerate that process, and really, you're going to bottom out in Minneapolis because Tim Walz is well liked by the radicals in Minneapolis, not so much the other people living there, which is decreasing by the day because they don't really like Minneapolis anymore. And you are not going to get a infinitely higher amount of support compared to 2020, because 2020, you pretty much bottomed out with how much support Democrats could get out of that city. And really, where are you going to go from there? you've maxed out your support in the deep blue radical city. Now you're pissing off all the rural voters, and you really don't want to do that because then you would lose the election. Because if Minnesota is remotely competitive, all the swing states are going to Donald Trump. We already got Georgia, because Georgia, Tim Walz has absolutely no appeal there. Kamala Harris is also not appealing there. You got Arizona. You didn't go with Mark Gilley, which he's pretty well liked in a swing state. You didn't go with him, and you picked Tim Walz. None of them have any sort of support there. So Arizona, that's a bust. Nevada, that's trending Republican, and also not a lot of appeal there because a lot of the people who move there are from California and don't necessarily like Kamala Harris. And Tim Walz doesn't really have much appeal there, so you're not really recovering a lot of voters there and can't really maximize support in, say, Las Vegas or Reno because they're just kind of different. They're a lot more Republican, and they're not like Minneapolis. Really, the only support that Tim Walz adds to the ticket is radicals in deep blue cities. That is not going to win you the election because while he adds that to the ticket, which is not really much, he takes away from the ticket the moderate voters, the independents, and rural voters in Minnesota and Wisconsin and probably Michigan. You do not want that because if that does happen, if the trends and how he adds to the ticket, if that is real, then you are talking about losing a ton of support in the Midwest, and especially in states like Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. The Sun Belt at that point is completely gone because you're picking someone who's not even from there and doesn't really have a lot of support there, not really very blue collar down in the South. And Kamala, she definitely doesn't have much support outside of deep blue cities. So you're going with a radical ticket that only really has its support in deep blue cities. That is not a strategy to win. If you do not get at least some support outside of the deep blue cities and try and actually appeal to voters that aren't extremely radical Democrats, you're not going to win the election. Saying that socialism is this great thing that is, according to Tim Walz, just another man's neighborliness, that doesn't bode well in places like Florida, where you got a lot of people from Cuba. That doesn't bode well in a place like, I don't know, rural Minnesota, where a lot of those people don't necessarily like socialism and they don't really like all that crap. And they really only vote for Democrats because it's just what they're used to doing. And you're just going to accelerate the trend of Minnesota moving to the right, which is not something that you want, considering how Minnesota, not exactly a safe Democrat state. Tim Walz might be the only person who putting him on the ticket actually takes away from winning the state that he's from. Mark Kelly, if you picked him, you probably would have done better in Arizona. Josh Shapiro, you probably would have done better in Pennsylvania. Gretchen Whitmer probably do better in Michigan. Tim Walz, on the other hand, is so unpopular and so radical, you actually would probably lose support picking him. And apparently that's what Kamala did because her entire team, and especially her, she's incompetent. She is the stupidest politician and the stupidest presidential candidate in history. Why would you pick a radical when you're trying to appear moderate and pick them from a state that isn't even really that competitive? Why? That is so stupid. You're just going to piss off voters. Is that the whole idea? Is that you get peace with the radicals, but you piss off every other voter? That doesn't win you the election. That is going to end up accelerating Trump and completely killing off all the momentum that has been perpetuated by Kamala kicking out Joe Biden. You're going to get the exact same crap that Joe Biden was given when he went on that debate stage and has been promoting these radical policies that not a lot of Americans agree with. And Kamala, she wanted to distance herself from that. So why would you pick a vice president pick when you're trying to do that and pick the most radical option out of all the possible candidates. Pete Buttigieg is somehow less radical than Tim Walz because Tim Walz, again, is like Bernie Sanders. You're essentially picking Bernie Sanders to put on your ticket. You're picking Bernie Sanders with no charisma, no appeal to any special group of voters outside of radicals, and with no support base in his own state. That is so monumentally stupid that it's both shocking and in line with Kamala Harris because she is stupid. She does do stupid crap like this, and really, what are you going to do about it? You got pretty much everything working against you, and then you double down on that by picking a candidate who is so insanely stupid in terms of picking him that you are just going to infinitely decrease your support, and you're going to pretty much kill off all independent voters who are supporting you right now off of the hype. That is killing all the Kamala hype. It will kill it, and it will send it to tomorrow. And you are not going to be able to get that back because as long as you are stuck to Tim Walz, you are going to have to drag that baggage along with all the baggage from Joe Biden. And what should Trump do about this? He should be asking for a debate every single day until they actually debate. Every single day, you should be calling for a debate because, especially JD Vance, he should also be doing that because Tim Walz is not a good debater. He sucks at his policies and doesn't really have a good defense for them and is tied with so much baggage that it might actually sink Kamala's chances of winning the presidency because she had to deal with her own baggage and then Joe Biden's baggage and now Tim Walz's baggage. And that is going to sink the ship. And you are going to have to deal with that because you made a stupid decision picking the most radical person out of all the possible candidates because I guess picking a Jew is too hard and might piss off your voters. So, yeah, we'll see you guys next time. Bye.